The first bullet shot past Faye Winters' head like a warning from fate itself, splintering the wooden beam beside her as she ducked behind the counter of her father's general store. The year was 1878, and Sweetwater Creek, Wyoming Territory, was supposed to be a peaceful town. At least that's what her father had promised when he dragged her west from Philadelphia 3 years ago. Hand over the money, girl, and nobody gets hurt. The bank robber's voice was muffled behind his bandana, but his gun spoke clearly enough. Faye's hands trembled as she opened the register. 23 years of careful living, of keeping her heart and hopes locked away after watching her mother wither and die from a broken heart, and this was how it would end, shot dead in a dusty frontier town that had never felt like home. "Hurry up," the man barked. The bell above the door jingled and a shadow darkened the entrance. The robber swung around, but he wasn't fast enough. A tall figure moved with startling speed, and before Faye could blink, the robber was disarmed and sprawled on the floor, a boot planted firmly on his chest. "Madam, you all right?" The stranger's voice was deep, with a soft western drawl that somehow managed to sound both gentle and commanding. Faye nodded, unable to find her voice as she stared at her rescuer. He wore simple trail clothes, dusty jeans, a blue cotton shirt, and a worn leather vest. His face was partially shadowed by his hat, but she could see strong features weathered by sun and wind. "I'm Drake Morgan," he said, tipping his hat with his free hand while keeping the robber pinned. "Seems like I arrived in town just in time." That was the moment Faye Winters would later recall as the beginning of the end of her solitary existence, though she didn't know it yet. All she knew was that, for the first time in years, something besides fear had made her heart race. Within the hour, Sheriff Patterson had locked up the would-be robber, and Faye found herself pouring coffee for her rescuer in the back room of the store. Her hands were still shaking slightly. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Morgan," she said, pushing a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. Drake accepted the coffee with a nod. "Just Drake, please, and no thanks necessary. Couldn't very well ride past a lady in distress." Faye studied him as he sipped his coffee. He was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. His eyes were a striking blue against his tanned skin, and a thin scar ran along his jawline. "What brings you to Sweetwater Creek?" she asked, more to fill the silence than out of real curiosity. Drifters came and went in frontier towns. They rarely stayed long enough to become anything more than a passing story. "Looking for work," he replied. "I hear the Johnson Ranch is hiring hands for the season." "They are," Faye confirmed. "My father supplies their provisions. Mr. Johnson was in yesterday saying they need men who know cattle." She hesitated. "Are you staying in town tonight? The boarding house has rooms." Something flickered in Drake's eyes, amusement perhaps. "Planning to, madam." "Got a horse that needs rest as much as I do." The door to the store opened, and Faye's father called out, "Faye, Sheriff Patterson told me what happened. Are you all right?" George Winters was a round man with a perpetually worried expression that had only deepened since his wife's death. He hurried into the back room, stopping short at the sight of Drake. "Papa, this is Mr. Morgan. He stopped the robbery," Faye explained. George pumped Drake's hand vigorously. "I can't thank you enough, sir. My Faye is all I have in this world." Drake nodded politely. "Just happened to be in the right place." "You must let us repay you somehow," George insisted. "Dinner tonight at least. We live just behind the store." Faye stiffened. Her father's well-meaning hospitality often embarrassed her, especially with his thinly veiled attempts to introduce her to any unmarried man who passed through town. "That's kind," but Drake began. "I insist," George said firmly. 7 o'clock, Faye makes a fine stew." After her father returned to help a customer, Faye sighed. "I apologize for my father. You needn't feel obligated." Drake set down his empty cup. "No obligation felt. A home-cooked meal sounds mighty fine after weeks of trail cooking." He stood, towering over her 5'4" frame. "Until tonight, Miss Winters." As he walked out, Faye watched him go with a curious mixture of apprehension and something else she couldn't quite name. She had built her life around independence and self-reliance, determined never to make her mother's mistake of giving her heart to a man who could break it. Yet there was something about Drake Morgan that made her wonder if all men were cut from the same unreliable cloth. That evening, Faye found herself taking unusual care with her appearance. She chose her blue dress, the one that matched her eyes, and pinned her hair up in a style that softened her features. When she caught herself fussing, she frowned at her reflection. "Don't be foolish," she murmured to herself. "He's just a drifter passing through." Dinner was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Drake proved to be well-spoken and thoughtful, answering George's many questions about his background with patience. He had grown up in Texas, fought briefly in the final days of the Civil War, though he was scarcely more than a boy, and had spent the years since working cattle across the territories. "Never settled in one place?" George asked, with his usual lack of subtlety. Drake's eyes met Faye's briefly. "Never found a reason to," he replied. "And your family?" Faye asked, curious despite herself. A shadow crossed Drake's face. "Lost my parents to fever when I was 14. Raised by my uncle until I was old enough to make my own way." "I'm sorry," Faye said softly, recognizing the familiar pain of loss in his eyes. Drake shrugged. "It was a long time ago." After dinner, George excused himself to finish the store's monthly accounts, leaving Faye alone with Drake on the small porch behind the house. The evening was warm, stars beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. "Your father's a good man," Drake observed, leaning against the porch railing. "He is," Faye agreed. "Though he worries too much, especially about me." "That's what fathers do, I reckon." Faye smiled faintly. "He wants to see me married before he dies. He doesn't understand that not everyone needs that kind of life." Drake raised an eyebrow. "And what kind of life do you need, Miss Winters?" The question caught her off guard. "A simple one," she answered after a moment. "One where I don't depend on anyone who might leave." The words came out more bluntly than she'd intended. "Sounds lonely," Drake said, not unkindly. "It's safe," Faye countered. "My mother loved my father desperately." When he decided to move west for a better opportunity, she followed, even though it broke her heart to leave everything she knew. The journey was hard in this place. She gestured at the town beyond. It killed her spirit before it killed her body. "I won't make that mistake." Drake was quiet for a long moment. "Not all journeys end that way." "Perhaps not," Faye conceded, "but I prefer certainty to chance." The following morning, Faye opened the store as usual, trying to put the previous day's excitement behind her. She didn't expect to see Drake again. Men like him came and went like tumbleweeds. Yet she couldn't help glancing up each time the bell above the door jingled. It was nearly noon when he appeared, looking freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. "Good morning, Miss Winters," he greeted, removing his hat. "I hoped I might find you here." Faye felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. "Mr. Morgan, did you need supplies for your journey?" "Actually, I've taken that job at the Johnson Ranch," he said. "I'll be staying in the area for a while." "Oh," Faye busied herself rearranging items on the counter. "Well, congratulations, the Johnsons are good employers," Drake nodded. "So I hear. I also hear there's a social at the church Saturday evening. I wondered if you might consider attending with me." Faye looked up, startled. "Mr. Morgan Drake," he corrected. "Drake," she amended. "I appreciate the offer, but I rarely attend such functions." "All the more reason to make an exception," he said with a slight smile. "Besides, I'd be much obliged for an introduction to some of the townspeople, being new and all." Faye hesitated. Put that way, it seemed churlish to refuse. "I suppose I could," she said reluctantly, "but only as a neighborly gesture." Drake's smile widened. "Of course, purely neighborly." As he left, Faye found herself wondering what she had just agreed to. It wasn't a courting, she told herself firmly, simply a kindness to a newcomer. Nothing more. Saturday arrived too quickly for Faye's comfort. She wore her best dress, a green calico that her father had ordered from a catalog back east, and allowed herself a small dab of her mother's precious remaining perfume. Drake arrived at their door promptly at 7, and Faye's heart did a treacherous little skip at the sight of him. He had made an effort as well, wearing a dark jacket over a crisp white shirt, his unruly hair tamed for the occasion. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, flustered by the direct compliment. The church social was already in full swing when they arrived. Lanterns hung from the trees outside the white clapboard building, and fiddle music spilled out the open doors. Inside, tables laden with food lined one wall, while the center of the room had been cleared for dancing. "Faye Winters," Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, hurried over. "How wonderful to see you here, it's been too long." Her curious gaze shifted to Drake. "Mrs. Peterson, this is Drake Morgan," Faye introduced. "He's new to town, working at the Johnson Ranch." Over the next hour, Faye found herself introducing Drake to what seemed like the entire population of Sweetwater Creek. To her surprise, she was enjoying herself. Drake was attentive without being possessive, staying close enough to make it clear they had arrived together, but giving her space to talk with the women she knew. "Care to dance?" he asked when the fiddle struck up a lively tune. Faye hesitated. "I'm not very practiced." "Neither am I," he admitted. "We can be unpracticed together." Something about his easy manner broke through her reserve, and she found herself being led onto the dance floor. Drake proved to be a better dancer than he claimed, guiding her through the steps with a firm but gentle hand at her waist. "See, not so terrible," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Faye laughed despite herself. "Not terrible at all." As the evening wore on, Faye became aware of curious glances and whispered conversations. It had been so long since she'd participated in town social life that her presence with Drake was causing a stir. She tried to ignore it, but when Betty Collins, the town gossip, sidled up while Drake was getting them punch, Faye braced herself. My, Faye," Betty said with a sly smile. "Quite a handsome fellow you found, and so attentive." "Mr. Morgan is new in town," Faye replied stiffly. "I'm simply helping him get acquainted." Betty's eyebrows rose. "Is that what they're calling it these days? Well, if that's the case, I might need some acquainting myself." Faye felt a flush of something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. "Excuse me, I should check on my father," she murmured, moving away. She found her father engrossed in conversation with Mr. Johnson and several other ranchers. George looked up with a pleased smile. "There you are, daughter." "Having a good time?" "Yes, Papa," she said, trying to sound convincing, "but I'm feeling a bit tired. Would you mind if I headed home soon?" George's face fell slightly. "Already? But the evening's barely started." He glanced past her. "And what about your young man?" "He's not my young man," Faye said, more sharply than she intended. "Everything all right?" Drake appeared beside her, holding 2 cups of punch. Faye took a deep breath. "Actually, I was just telling my father that I should be getting home. I have an early morning tomorrow." Drake studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "I'll walk you back." Despite her protests that it wasn't necessary, Drake insisted on escorting her. They walked in silence through the quiet town, the sounds of the social fading behind them. "Did I do something to upset you?" he finally asked as they approached the store. Faye sighed. "No, it's not you, it's—" She stopped, unsure how to explain. "People talk in small towns, they make assumptions. And you're worried they'll assume things about us," Drake concluded. "Yes, would that be so terrible?" Faye looked up at him, startled by the directness of the question. In the moonlight, his face was serious without its usual hint of amusement. "I told you before, Mr. Morgan, I'm not looking for entanglements." "Drake," he corrected automatically. "And I remember what you said." "I'm just not convinced you believe it yourself." Faye felt a flash of anger. "You don't know me well enough to make that judgment." "Maybe not," he conceded, "but I'd like the chance to." They had reached her door, and Faye fumbled with the key, suddenly eager to escape the intensity of his gaze. "Thank you for the evening and for walking me home." "Good night, Mr. Morgan." Before she could open the door, Drake placed his hand gently on her arm. "Faye." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way he said it made her heart flutter. "I'm not asking for promises. Just a chance to know you better." Faye looked up at him, caught between the safety of her solitude and the inexplicable pull she felt toward this man. "I'll think about it," she said finally, and slipped inside before she could change her mind. That night, sleep eluded her. Drake Morgan had disturbed the careful equilibrium of her life in just a few short days. She told herself it was foolish to even consider allowing him closer. Men like him didn't stay. They moved with the seasons, following work and opportunity. Even if he claimed to want something more, the open road would eventually call him back. Yet something about him was different from the other men who had expressed interest in her over the years. There was a steadiness to him, a calm assurance that didn't need to prove itself with boasts or grand gestures. The next morning, Faye was distracted as she helped customers, earning curious looks when she misheard questions or fumbled with change. By mid-afternoon, a thunderstorm was brewing, dark clouds gathering over the mountains to the west. The store emptied as people hurried home before the weather broke. Faye was about to close early when the door opened, bringing with it the smell of rain and the imposing figure of Drake Morgan. He was soaked, having clearly been caught in the first downpour. "You're drenched," she said, stating the obvious. Drake removed his hat, water dripping onto the floor. "Got caught halfway to town," he admitted. "Thought I'd make it before the storm hit." "What brings you to town in such weather?" Faye asked, fetching a towel from behind the counter. Drake accepted it gratefully. "Johnson sent me to pick up some supplies, and," he added with a faint smile, "I hope to see you." Faye busied herself gathering the items on Mr. Johnson's usual order list. "How are you finding the work?" she asked, avoiding his gaze. "Good honest work with good people," Drake replied. "Though the accommodations leave something to be desired. Been thinking I might look for a more permanent situation if I decide to stay in the area." Faye glanced up at that. "Are you considering staying then?" "Might be," he said, his eyes holding hers. "If I found reason enough." The implications of his words hung in the air between them, interrupted by a tremendous crack of thunder that made Faye jump. Rain was now pounding against the windows, turning the street outside into a river of mud. "You can't go back in this," Faye said, looking at the deluge. "You'd better wait it out here." Drake nodded his agreement, and Faye found herself in the unusual position of being alone with him in the empty store. To keep her hands busy, she began the end-of-day inventory, aware of him watching her as he dried himself as best he could. "Can I help?" he offered after a few minutes. Faye hesitated, then handed him a pencil and paper. "You could note down how many sacks of flour we have left." They worked side by side for nearly an hour, the storm showing no signs of abating. Despite her initial awkwardness, Faye found herself relaxing in Drake's company. He asked intelligent questions about the business, sharing stories of his own experiences in return. "How did you learn to read and write so well?" Faye asked, noticing his neat handwriting. "Many ranch hands I've met can barely sign their names." "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married," Drake explained. "She made sure I had education even after we moved west. Said a man needed more than strong hands to make something of himself." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Drake agreed, a note of sadness in his voice. "I think she'd have liked you." The simple statement touched Faye unexpectedly. "Why do you say that?" Drake considered for a moment. "You have the same quiet strength she had, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself." Before Faye could respond, the store's front door burst open and Sheriff Patterson stumbled in, rain streaming from his oilskin coat. "Faye," he gasped, "your pa's had an accident." He was helping secure the church roof against the storm when he fell. Doctor's with him now. Faye felt the blood drain from her face. "How bad is it?" "Broken leg for certain, maybe ribs too. He's asking for you." Without thinking, Faye grabbed her shawl. Drake caught her arm. "I'll come with you," he said, his voice brooking no argument. They splashed through the flooded streets to the doctor's house where George had been taken. Dr. Wilson met them at the door, his expression grim but not devastating. "He'll live," the doctor assured Faye, but it's a bad break. He'll be off his feet for weeks, maybe months. George was pale against the sheets, his face drawn with pain despite the laudanum the doctor had administered. "Faye," he whispered when he saw her, "the store." "Don't worry about the store, Papa," Faye soothed, taking his hand. "Just concentrate on getting well. But the delivery's tomorrow, the new shipment coming in." George's voice was weak with worry. "I'll handle it," Faye promised, though her mind was racing with the enormity of running the business alone. "I can help," Drake said quietly from behind her. "I worked in a general store in Fort Worth for a spell. I know the basics." Faye turned to him, surprised. "You don't have to, I want to," he interrupted. "Let me help, Faye." In the face of her father's injury and the daunting prospect of managing alone, Faye found her resistance crumbling. "All right," she agreed. "Thank you." The next few weeks established a new rhythm to Faye's life. Drake arranged with Mr. Johnson to work part-time at the ranch, spending the rest of his hours helping at the store. He proved to be a quick learner and a natural with customers, his easy manner drawing people in, with Drake handling the heavy lifting and dealing with the more difficult customers. Faye found herself able to spend more time with her father during his recovery. George, initially frustrated by his helplessness, gradually came to appreciate the enforced rest, using the time to teach Faye more about the financial side of the business. "Drake's a good man," George commented one evening as Faye brought him his dinner. "Reliable, hardworking." Faye nodded noncommittally, though she couldn't deny the truth of it. Over the weeks, she had watched Drake keep his word on every promise, show up early and stay late, and treat every customer with respect regardless of their status in town. "He's been a great help," she agreed. George studied his daughter's face. "Is that all he is to you?" "Help?" Faye busied herself adjusting her father's pillows. "He's a friend, Papa." "He looks at you the way I used to look at your mother," George said softly. "And sometimes, when you don't think anyone's watching, you look at him the same way." "Papa, please," Faye protested. "Don't start matchmaking," George sighed. "I just want you to be happy, Faye. Your mother wouldn't have wanted you to close yourself off from love because of what happened to her." Faye had no answer for that. The truth was, she was no longer certain of her own feelings. Drake had become a constant in her days, a steady presence she found herself looking forward to even as she tried to maintain emotional distance. One evening in late October, as the first chill of winter hung in the air, Drake asked Faye to accompany him on a ride. "There's something I want to show you," he said, a hint of nervous energy in his usually calm demeanor. "Curious," Faye agreed. They rode west out of town, following a trail that wound through golden aspen groves and up into the foothills. After about an hour, Drake led them around a bend, and Faye gasped. Before them lay a small valley, sheltered on three sides by gentle slopes. A creek meandered through it, and at its center stood a cabin weathered but solid, with smoke curling from its chimney. "What is this place?" Faye asked, taking in the peaceful scene. Drake dismounted, helping her down from her horse. "It belonged to old Jim Carpenter. When he died last month, his daughter in Denver decided to sell." He paused. "I bought it." Faye turned to him in surprise. "You bought land? I thought you were just passing through." "I was," Drake admitted, "until I found a reason to stay." The way he looked at her left no doubt about what or who that reason was. Faye felt her carefully constructed defenses begin to waver. "Would you like to see inside?" Drake asked. The cabin was simple but well built, with a main room containing a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a bedroom off to one side. Someone Drake, she realized, had been working on it. The floors were swept clean, the windows washed, and fresh curtains hung. "It needs work," Drake acknowledged, watching her take it all in. "But the roof's sound and the well water's sweet." He hesitated. "I thought maybe it could be a home." Faye ran her fingers along the rough-hewn table, her mind racing. "It's lovely," she said cautiously, "but why show me?" Drake took a deep breath. "Because I've been thinking about what you said that first night, about wanting a life where you don't depend on anyone who might leave." He took a step closer. "Faye, I'm not leaving. I've spent my whole life moving from place to place, never putting down roots. But something happened when I rode into Sweetwater Creek, when I met you. Faye's heart hammered in her chest. Drake, let me finish, he said gently. I know you're afraid, I know you've seen how love can hurt, but it can also heal. It can build something stronger than what was there before. He gestured around them. Like this place, it needs care and attention, but the foundation is solid. Tears pricked at Faye's eyes. I don't know if I can, she whispered. I've spent so long protecting myself. Drake stepped forward, taking her hands in his. I'm not asking you to stop being strong, being independent. Those are the things I admire about you. I'm just asking for a chance to stand beside you, not in your way. Faye looked up into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, one where safety came not from isolation but from the right kind of connection. I need time, she said finally. To be sure, Drake nodded, a smile touching his lips. Time I've got. And a place that's just waiting to become a home. As winter settled over Wyoming territory, Faye found herself drawn more and more to the little cabin in the valley. On Sundays, when the store was closed, Drake would ride into town to escort her there, where they would work side by side, Faye sewing curtains or preparing simple meals, Drake repairing furniture or building shelves. They talked as they worked, sharing stories of their pasts and hopes for the future. Faye learned about Drake's years on the trail, the sights he'd seen and the hardships he'd endured. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, her mother's decline, and her own determination to survive without depending on anyone. But you depend on your father, Drake pointed out one afternoon as they sat by the fire after a day's work. That's different, Faye said. Family is. Obligated, Drake shook his head. Love isn't about obligation, Faye, it's about choice. Every day we choose who to give our time to, who to care for. And people can choose to leave, she countered. Yes, Drake agreed, but they can also choose to stay, to build something that lasts. As Christmas approached, George's health improved enough for him to return to the store for short periods. He watched with knowing eyes as Drake came to call for Faye each Sunday, returning her home after dark with pine needles in her hair or sawdust on her skirts. When are you going to admit that you love him? George asked bluntly one evening as they sat by the fire. Faye looked up from her mending, startled. Papa? Life's too short for such stubbornness, daughter, George said. I've seen how you look at that man. And I've seen the home he's building for you. He's building it for himself, Faye protested weakly. George snorted. A single man needs a cabin that size with flowered curtains and a garden plot. He's building a future, Faye. The question is whether you're brave enough to be part of it. His words stayed with Faye through the night and into the next day. Was it bravery she lacked? She had always thought of her self-reliance as a strength, but perhaps there was a kind of courage in opening oneself to love despite the risks. The following Sunday, Drake arrived as usual, but Faye noticed something different about him, a nervous energy he couldn't quite hide. I have something to show you at the cabin, he said as they rode out of town. When they arrived, Faye immediately noticed changes. A wreath of pine boughs hung on the door and smoke rose invitingly from the chimney. Inside, the cabin was transformed. A small Christmas tree stood in one corner, decorated with paper stars and candles. The table was set for a meal, and delicious smells came from the pot hanging over the fire. Drake, this is beautiful, Faye breathed. Merry Christmas, he said softly. I know it's a few days early, but I wanted us to have our own celebration. They enjoyed a simple but delicious meal of venison stew and fresh bread that Drake admitted he'd had helped preparing from Mrs. Johnson. Afterward, as they sat by the fire, Drake reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. I have something for you, he said, his voice suddenly serious. Faye unwrapped the gift carefully. Inside was a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. When she opened it, a melody began to play, a sweet, gentle tune that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. It's beautiful, she whispered. Open the lid all the way, Drake urged. Faye did as he asked and gasped. Nestled inside the box was a simple silver band with a small pearl. "It was my mother's," Drake said, his voice husky with emotion. "She made me promise I'd only give it to a woman who was as strong and true as she was." He took Faye's hands in his. "I've found that woman in you." Faye stared at the ring, her heart pounding. "Drake, I'm not asking for an answer today," he said quickly. "I know you need time, but I want you to have this as a promise that whenever you're ready, a month from now, a year, even longer, I'll be here. Because I love you, Faye Winters. And I believe that with enough patience and care, even the most guarded heart can find its way home." Faye looked around the cabin that Drake had transformed into a warm, inviting space. She thought of the care he had shown her father, the respect he had given her independence, the patience with which he had waited for her to lower her defenses. "You've given me so much," she said softly, "and I've given you so little in return." Drake shook his head. "That's not true. You've given me a reason to stop wandering, a place to belong." In that moment, something shifted inside Faye, a wall crumbling, a door opening. She realized that what she had mistaken for weakness, the vulnerability of loving someone, might actually be the greatest strength of all. "Ask me," she whispered. Drake's eyes widened. "What? Ask me properly," Faye said, her voice stronger now. "Right now." A slow smile spread across Drake's face. He took the ring from the box and knelt before her. "Faye Winters, will you marry me? Will you make a home with me, here in this valley? Will you take the chance that love is stronger than fear?" Faye looked into his eyes and saw her future, not the lonely existence she had resigned herself to, but a life rich with possibility, with shared joys and burdens, with the kind of love that built rather than destroyed. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." Drake's hands trembled as he slid the ring onto her finger. Then he was pulling her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. Spring came early to Wyoming that year, bringing with it the wedding of Faye Winters and Drake Morgan. They were married in the church in Sweetwater Creek, with George Winters beaming proudly as he gave away his daughter. The entire town turned out for the celebration, many expressing astonishment that the fiercely independent Faye had finally found someone worthy of her heart. Betty Collins was overheard remarking that it just went to show that even the most determined spinster could be won over by the right man, a comment that made Faye laugh rather than bristle. After the wedding, Drake drove Faye in a flower-decorated wagon to their cabin in the valley. They had spent the winter preparing it together, and now it stood ready, a true home filled with both his strength and her touches. As Drake carried her across the threshold, Faye felt none of the fear she had expected. Instead, she felt only certainty that this man, this home, this life was where she belonged. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morgan," Drake said, setting her gently on her feet. Faye looked around at their cabin, and then up at the man who had patiently waited for her to find her way to him. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out over their valley, Drake's arm around her shoulders, Faye thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the frightened girl who had watched her mother wither away, to the self-sufficient woman who had believed love had no place in her life, to this a woman who had found the courage to build a home not of walls, but of shared dreams. "What are you thinking about?" Drake asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About how wrong I was," Faye replied. "I thought love was a trap, something that made you weak." She turned to face him. "But real love, the kind you've shown me, it doesn't trap you, it gives you roots so you can grow." Drake smiled, the firelight from inside the cabin illuminating his face. "And a home to return to, no matter how far you wander." "I don't plan on wandering far," Faye assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Everything I need is right here." As the years passed, the little cabin in the valley grew, adding rooms as the Morgan family expanded. First came Daniel, born on a snowy night in their second year of marriage, with Drake pacing anxiously as the midwife tended to Faye. Then Eliza, 3 years later, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. Drake's small cattle operation prospered, while Faye continued to help her father with the store until George finally retired, content to spend his days spoiling his grandchildren. The store passed to Faye and Drake, becoming Morgan's General Goods, a fixture in Sweetwater Creek for generations to come. There were hard times, of course. Droughts that threatened the cattle, winters that seemed endless. The year little Daniel caught scarlet fever and they feared they might lose him. But through it all, Faye and Drake faced each challenge together, their love deepening with each obstacle overcome. On their 20th anniversary, Drake took Faye back to the spot where he had first shown her the cabin. The valley was transformed now a thriving homestead with a larger house, a barn, corrals, and fields of hay and vegetables. Their children were growing up strong and happy, with Daniel showing his father's way with horses and Eliza demonstrating her mother's head for business. "Did you ever imagine this?" Drake asked as they sat on their horses overlooking their domain. "That day when I first brought you here." Faye shook her head, her once auburn hair now streaked with silver. "Never. I couldn't see past my fear then." Drake reached across to take her hand, his touch still sending warmth through her after all these years. "And now, any regrets?" Faye looked at this man who had waited for her to find her courage, who had built her not just a house but a life filled with love and purpose. "Not one," she said firmly. "Not a single one." As they rode home together, Faye thought about the young woman she had been so certain that love had no place in her life. How wrong she had been. Love, she had learned, was not the prison she had feared but the foundation upon which everything worthwhile was built. Drake had brought her more than a home of timber and stone. He had shown her that home could be a person, someone who stood beside you through joy and sorrow, who saw your strength and cherished it, who gave you roots while respecting your wings. And that, Faye Morgan knew with absolute certainty, was worth every risk her heart had taken.